EF0, there's no alarm, no obvious warning, just wind that can't seem to pick a direction. That's usually the first sign, not a roar. An inconsistency, wind that shifts, wind that doubles back on itself. If you've spent enough time outdoors, your body notices it before your brain does. EF0 is the weakest entry on the enhanced Fujita scale. Winds between 105 and 137 kilometers per hour, strong enough to snap branches, skin shingles off rooftops, crack smaller trees at the trunk. But standing half a kilometer away, you'd probably just call it a bad storm and go back inside. Some people notice it in their ears first, a tiny pop. The kind you'd feel on a plane. Except you're standing in your backyard and there's no explanation for it. The pressure around the outer edge of a tornado drops. Even at EF0, air rushes inward and upward to feed the rotating column. That rush sounds like a rainstorm approaching from a direction you can't locate. Heavy, getting closer. Except there's no rain. Your dog knows before you do. Nobody is completely sure what animals pick up first. It might be low-frequency sound, it might be pressure changes. What's clear is that they respond early. You watch your dog pace near the back door and think it needs to go out. It doesn't need to go out. Something outside has changed and it knows. One woman in Kansas stood on her porch for 4 minutes watching a funnel cross a field half a mile away. She took photos. The sound, she said, just didn't seem that serious. She wasn't wrong. The sound genuinely wasn't. An EF0 touches down, travels a short distance, lifts back up. The whole thing is over before most people finish deciding what they're looking at. What nobody tells you is that the next level doesn't just get louder. It gets inside the walls. EF1. Picture the inside of a house during an EF1. You probably picture windows breaking, roof lifting, the dramatic stuff. What you don't picture is the 10 or 15 seconds before any of that, when the house is still intact and making noises it has never made before. Wood-framed buildings have a sound when they're under stress they weren't designed for. A low groan felt slightly more than heard. Not alarming on its own, the kind of sound you might notice once and explain away. Except during an EF1, it doesn't stop. It gets a little louder, a little more insistent. EF1 winds run between 138 and 177 kilometers per hour. Double the wind speed and the sound increases far faster than most people expect. The jump from EF0 to EF1 doesn't feel incremental. It feels like entering a different category of storm. More bass, more weight. This is where the freight train comparison finally starts to fit. Underneath the groan, glass starts to hum. Large panes flex inward and vibrate at a frequency that has no analog in normal experience. Low, sustained, wrong sounding. The window made a noise survivors had never heard a window make, and then it stopped making any noise at all. One man in Alabama heard something punch through his siding before the storm even felt close. It was his neighbor's mailbox. A 2x4 at these speeds carries the kinetic energy of a car at highway speed. When that hits a wall, it doesn't thud. It cracks. One short, sharp sound, then silence underneath the roar. Groan, glass hum, crack. If you hear that sequence and the wind is still building, you have very little time to reach the lowest interior point of the building. People who knew that lived. People who went to look out the window didn't always. The EF1 is the last level where sound gives you information you can actually use. At EF2, something else starts happening, something below the range of hearing, and by the time most people notice it, there's nothing left to do differently. EF2. Survivors of EF2 events kept reporting that they felt wrong before the tornado arrived, disoriented. Some described a creeping sense of dread while the storm was still blocks away. For years, this got written off as a normal fear response. Except some of these people didn't know the tornado was coming yet. Interior rooms, no windows, no visual warning, and something in their body was already responding. EF2 winds fall between 178 and 217 kilometers per hour. At this level, well-built homes don't just get damaged. They get the word destroyed in the official survey report. Roofs aren't peeled back. They're lifted as a unit and set down somewhere else. At EF2 rotation speeds, tornadoes generate infrasound. pressure waves below 20 hertz, below the floor of human hearing. Researchers have looked into whether these waves might account for the dread survivors report, the disorientation, the feeling that something is wrong before anything visible has happened. The reports are consistent enough that the question keeps getting asked. Inside a structure taking a direct hit, a pressure change, sometimes painful, then nails pulling from wood, a tearing sequential popping, then the roof, not gradually, but a single concussive crack as every connection fails at once. And then the storm is directly overhead with nothing between it and you. One woman in Missouri said the thing she remembered most was the half second between the roof leaving and the full force hitting. A pocket of near silence. She called it the loneliest sound she ever heard. Not silence exactly, just absence where the roar had been. At EF3, the tornado stops destroying neighborhoods. It starts removing them. EF3. Poll survivor accounts from the same EF3 tornado. People sheltering within a few blocks of each other, and they don't agree on what it sounded like. One person says it was the loudest thing they've ever heard. Another says they barely registered sound at all, mostly pressure and confusion. A third remembers a rhythmic pulsing. A fourth heard none of that. This isn't a memory problem. Where you're standing inside or around an EF3 changes what you get hit with. Two people a few blocks apart are living through different versions of the same storm. EF3 winds run between 218 and 266 kilometers per hour. Trees don't just uproot. The bark gets stripped by airborne material, sanded down to pale, smooth wood. Storm surveyors call this debarking. When you see a tree like that, you know. For people outside in ditches, the comparison that came up independently across multiple accounts was a jet engine. Though almost everyone walked it back immediately. A jet engine has steady pitch, an EF3 doesn't. It varies, it has harmonics underneath the main roar. That no manufactured process creates. Part of what they were hearing was the debris load. Lumber, soil, vehicles, the contents of every structure the tornado had already passed through. All of it rotating at tornado velocity, hitting the next thing. The sound of an EF3 is partly made of what it's already destroyed. This is also why it stops looking like weather. People who watched an EF3 approach said it didn't look like a funnel. It looked like a wall with the lights turned off, and the sound reached them before the wall did. One survivor described the rhythmic pulse she kept feeling as the tornado breathing. She didn't know why she used that word. She just said the sound had a rhythm, like something alive. Many EF3 tornadoes stay on the ground long enough to cross multiple communities in a line. The people in the second town often heard the storm long before they saw it. EF4. The firefighter who walked the Tuscaloosa damage path in 2011 said the first thing that struck him wasn't the destruction. It was how quiet the damage zone was. No buildings left to creak in the wind. No surfaces for sound to reflect off. Just open sky over a corridor of debris. And a silence that felt like the neighborhood had been switched off. EF4 winds run between 267 and 322 kilometers per hour. How well a house was built stops mattering. Vehicles get folded and thrown. Asphalt strips off road surfaces. A few seconds before the core arrives, a pressure wave hits first. A wind shift with direction and speed that people who'd survived lesser storms describe as immediately, unmistakably different. Not wind that's gusting, wind that's arriving. Some violent tornadoes grow several kilometers wide, large enough that the storm feels less like an object and more like part of the landscape. The 2011 Tuscaloosa-Birmingham storm tracked for over 200 kilometers. A tornado that size isn't something you hear the edge of. The sound and the storm and the sky are all one thing. Years later, some survivors sat in a room and listened to recordings of the storm they'd lived through. Almost all said the same thing. That's not what it sounded like. What's missing is everything below 20 hertz. That part didn't travel through the air to their ears. It traveled through the floor, the walls, their chest cavity. The playback room gave them the sound of the storm. It couldn't give them the feeling the storm was happening inside them. 59 confirmed EF5 tornadoes exist in recorded American history. The people who lived through them almost never describe what they heard. They describe what happened to their bodies. That gap is the whole distance between EF4 and EF5. EF5. The enhanced Fujita scale ends at EF5. Winds above 322 kilometers per hour, no upper bound. Above this threshold, damage is total, and total damage is total damage. Moore, Oklahoma was hit by an EF5 in 1999. In 2013, it was hit by another one. Meteorologists still cite it as one of the most extraordinary coincidences in modern tornado history. Ask survivors what it sounded like and something strange happens. They don't describe sound. One man described the dirt moving under him while he lay flat against the ground. Others described pressure on their ears severe enough to be painful. One woman said her memory was mostly vibration, her lungs, her ribs, the ground. An EF5 generates energy across nearly the entire detectable frequency spectrum at once. The ears process the audible portion. Everything below that threshold arrives as something closer to force. There's no framework for it. It doesn't get filed under weather. In the area of maximum damage, where the ground was scoured clean, voices carried farther than they should. A rescue worker called out for a survivor and heard her answer with unusual clarity across what should have been too much distance. 50 years of construction, erased in under a minute. In that absence, whispers carried. He said it was the detail he couldn't stop thinking about, not the destruction, the way a voice sounded over it. Okay. The fastest wind speed ever directly measured near a tornado was 484 kilometers per hour, recorded near Bridge Creek, Oklahoma in 1999. No instrument placed in the direct path survived. What the wind was doing at ground level is estimated. What it sounded like, if anyone had been there to hear it, nobody knows. Something travels ahead of a tornado before it forms. Not the visible funnel. Not any sound a person can hear. A wave of pressure at frequencies far below human hearing, moving outward from a storm that hasn't fully developed yet. This signal has been detected hundreds of kilometers from tornado events, arriving well before any audible warning reaches the surface. The average tornado warning lead time in the United States is 13 minutes. An infrasonic detection network could potentially stretch that to 30 or 40. The research has existed for years, the network hasn't been built. In 2013, near El Reno, Oklahoma, a tornado reached 4.2 kilometers wide at its peak and rated EF3. Not EF5, not even EF4. Width and intensity are entirely separate. The El Reno storm killed experienced storm chasers who had correctly calculated they were outside the damage path. The tornado expanded faster than any previously recorded event, faster than the models had a number for. Some theoretical studies suggest that an extremely energetic atmospheric event could produce infrasonic signals detectable over enormous distances. Whether that storm has happened and wasn't caught, or whether it hasn't happened yet, nobody can say. Somewhere out there, over an empty country, a storm stronger than anything measured may have already come and gone. No cameras, no instruments in the path. No one could describe what it sounded like. If it did, we didn't hear it. And we never will. But the atmosphere isn't finished. Somewhere over an empty country, a storm is forming right now that no model fully understands yet. And when it arrives, it won't just test the forecast. It will teach us something we didn't know the sky could do.